So welcome to this final session of today's broadcast here in Baku. And we have guests in the studio. We have Anita, Soina, and we have Ingmar Rentzhog to help us wrap up this fabulous day here from Baku. So, but first let's bring some colleagues in from other corners of the world. And let's first turn to Stockholm, where we have Christina Carlmark. So Christina, please share your impressions of this broadcast and this day.
Yes, my reflections from today goes back to the sessions we had on Indigenous peoples and their knowledge about nature, about the land, and about sustainability, and diversity is sustainability. And the connection to the session we had a little later, the conversation on sustainable agriculture. And I thought these two, they were very much connected and resonating, because in sustainable agriculture, you're also close to nature, you work with the land, you do things in harmony, and it's a traditional knowledge from farmers going back generations. And I think these two groups, sustainable farming and Indigenous peoples, there we have really knowledge that we need to use to see the system going forward. So I thought those two were very interesting to listen to. Lots of insights.
Thank you so much, Christina. And
Right.
I think we're going to Patrick.
Oh yes, I can see that. We're going to Patrick. Sorry, Patrick, I was thinking about something else. Yeah, Patrick from We Don't Have Time's office in Kenya. Patrick, how are you, and do you have any reflections?
Hi everyone, I'm well and I'm glad for great work that you are doing, at least to save our planet. Okay, today I have two insights. One of it came from someone called Martina Otto. I don't know whether
Oh yes,
I said the name rightly. Maybe
you did say
because
the
of
name
her
rightly. Yeah,
sense.
she's from the UN Environment Program. Yeah.
Yeah. I felt so much incited by her views that we need to highlight more regarding what Africa is doing, and not only Africa, the world. His session or her session was so wonderful to me. Someone else I can recommend for today's insight is called Susanna Olbis, something from UNDP. She really highlighted something to do, how we can work with this gap between the developing country and developed countries. I felt she said a lot. Like actually, she said it was insightful to hear her mentioning or speaking the great importance that we need, at least to cover the gap of finance that majority are suffering on it. So those are my main message for today. And still, there is someone who talked regarding the campaign that we are having, buy more time. I think it's the right time that we are having right now. We need to buy more time. At least we need to act so that we can solve the problems that are being experienced all over from every part or corner of the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, and thanks, Christina from Stockholm as well. That's great.
So Anita, Soina, you've been active as always today. So what are your main takeaways? What have you been up to?
Well, it's my last day at COP, but I think one of the most productive days for me. I spoke at a high-level event, Commonwealth event, that was on Indigenous knowledge and the role of Indigenous and traditional knowledge in solving climate crisis and other crises. And I spoke about the work that we do back at home and what we do to encourage transfer of such knowledge from the older generation to ourselves, where we hold storytelling forums between the older generation and ourselves. And the the important part about it is, like I said, action happens at home, but at COP there's also something that happens. So today, at least I was able to secure some collaborations after that event for our programs back home. So that means when we go back home, we are going to have more engagements of the same, where we'll continue to bring together young people and the older generation, as well as push for at least mainstreaming of such knowledge in the formal education sector. And I also got to, since it was also Water Day, I was able to secure some collaborations also for addressing water challenges back home at the Water Pavilion. So I think today was very, very productive, not just for me, but also for the communities back home, the children, the people that I work with, the people that I represent. Yes.
Well, that sounds like a fabulous send-off for you to go back to Kenya with. Thank you so much, Anita. Thanks for joining us more or less every day here at the studio. Ingmar Rentzhog, what are your main takeaways here? What would you like to convey?
My main takeaway, methane. It's happening a lot, actually. And just 1 hour before now, we actually received a press release from the COP29. And it says that countries representing nearly 50% of global methane emission from organic waste pledged to reduce emission from the sector. And it's not the usual countries you see taking lead on things. It's countries like Russia, United Arab Emirates, and many other quite heavily oil countries. And I think that's great, because if you can't reduce carbon dioxide fast enough, you must reduce something else. You need to reduce everything, but not all countries will be leader on everything. So I think that's great, and that gave me a lot of positive optimism around COP. The COP is so important for to create the momentum to do those things. But there's one problem with it. And that is, it's still pledges. It's not legal binding agreement. But I do believe that in order to get it legal binding, you need to start pledge it, and when people wants to do it, they can sign the contract where they also are going to do it. But I don't think it will happen just by pledging. We need to move this forward into some legal binding document. Maybe not at a COP, but at something else. The Buy More Time campaign, we advocate for replicate the success of the Montreal Protocol. And the Montreal Protocol was not this consensus protocol. It was actually only 46 countries that came together in Montreal and that signed a legal binding document to phase out freons that were destroying the ozone layer. Today, the ozone layer are healing, and 200 countries have signed it.
Starting
so the point here is that you don't need to start with 200 countries. You just need to start with a couple of willing countries. And in this case, I want to credit all of the countries that have signed this. And number one country is actually Azerbaijan. So great job. Much more to do, but this is a good mid-second week action.
I'll just say that I think also what's coming is, and everybody knows, is that the ability to see this methane coming out, not just of the oil and gas industry, but the waste tips around the world via the methane sat and some other satellites and other things in the pipeline, means that everyone can see what they're doing, even if it's oil and gas industry, but also even if it's waste tips.
Yeah, and that's very important, because if you pledge something, no one knows, not even you know if you're performing on it. That doesn't mean anything. But if you pledge something, because you know that everyone can see what you do, and everyone will actually see if you follow through the pledge or not. So pledges are too weak, but in this case, I actually think that pledges will work better just because we now have the data.
So instead of relying on governments to communicate to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change their assessment of their own emissions, they can still do that, but there's something up there in the space going, that's not quite right.
So there's a lot of initiatives out there, like the Methane sat, like Climate Trace. We have heard about them during the broadcast here from COP, and those are offering free data, where you can access the data about methane emission, about carbon dioxide and other pollution. I think someone out there should build a database where they connect the pledges with the real-time pollution data, and we can track who is performing on the pledges and who is not performing on the pledges. And actually, I believe that the countries doing the pledges, they will need that because they need it in order to keep track on their own action.
Well, thank you very much, Ingmar, and this is great news with methane, and thank you again, Anita, and safe travels back to Kenya. Let's move on.
So now with me in the studio is Rachel Barr, the CEO and founder of climate tech Propel. And we're really pleased to see her. We'd like to have in the wrap-up an unusual guest or somebody that we haven't seen before, as it were, and or not so often. And let me say, you were previously the Vice President of Sustainability at UBQ Materials, and so maybe what was that, and then what made you quit your job and launch Climate Tech Propel? And tell us what Climate Tech Propel is.
My mom asked the same question, to be honest. Why would you quit?
Okay.
So UBQ is a very interesting company. They take mixed household waste, MSW, and they have a process that they can make it into a novel material that's called UBQ as well. And it can go as a drop-in solution for things like hard plastics. Eventually it'll be used, I believe, at scale for the built space, because ultimately when we're talking about hundreds of millions of tons of waste, we have to put it into the built space because it has to go somewhere if we can't actually process it into compost and recycle it, because there's a lot of the waste that can't be composted and that can't be recycled. And so UBQ is a solution for what was left. So why would I leave? It was a challenging decision, but frankly, it made a lot of sense. It was after my second COP at Sharm where I realized that there weren't many people in the room who had the background that I have. I'm a climate change economist. I have an undergrad in business. I've done way too much education to be, a normal human. And so I have a very niche type of skill set. I can understand across a number of worlds in diplomacy and business, and also talk the numbers. And at UBQ, though, I didn't do much conventional sustainability. I didn't do much reporting. What did I do? I helped the PR team punch up what they were doing, the marketing team translate sustainability into their whatever it might be for the deliverable for them. The sales team understand the ESG reports of the potential clients and translate that into value proposition, and then help support the fundraising by defending the due diligence and things like that. And so when I talked to other innovators, and I was brought to COP by the State of Israel on behalf of UBQ, but because we were part of a selection of I believe 10 or 20 innovations that were considered the leading ones in Israel, I realized that a lot of the people who were there didn't know why they were at COP. They had companies that maybe were doing robotic beehives, for example, or they were doing an alternative protein. And in some cases, like in the protein space, they really didn't know why they were at COP. They had a mission for what they were going to do here in terms of policy advocacy and involvement, but most of those startups sure didn't know why they were here or even know what to do when they got here. And what I understood was I knew why they were here. And so through speaking with them, I realized, well, these are the top 10 startups in Israel in climate tech. And Israel at the time was the leading climate tech innovator in the world. And so I thought, well, if the best in Israel didn't know why they were here, then clearly I had to leave my job and start helping other climate techs at the very tippity top of the impact scale. And so that's how Climate Tech was born. Climate Tech Propel was born.
Right. It's very interesting you should say that, because I was just thinking that on our show tomorrow that I'd like to hear the voice of business. And I was kind of reflecting a little bit on why would I ask the voice of business to come on our show? And I can see on one level it would be that for some businesses, maybe the larger businesses, but also medium or small-sized businesses, that they might be here to lobby for faster action on cutting emissions because they have a product or they have a solution. Let's make it simple. They do solar energy, for example. They want to see the transition continue so that their products can be sold. But after that, I thought, okay, it's a bit of a trade fair as well these days, the COPs. They weren't like that 20 years ago, but they were just government negotiations. Okay, I can see that too. But I still kept struggling a little bit about it. And I think what you've done is just bridged something there, which is that trying to actually help those companies to know how to break through the kind of fog of these kinds of negotiations and engage with maybe government delegations or others to say, I've got a solution to your problem, you know, maybe you should check it out, because especially developing countries as well often say, well, we don't have solutions for all these things, what can we do, right?
Yeah,
so
you're right. I mean, I think you're right on a lot of different levels. So I can talk about my day-to-day. I was asked by CCAC, we're a partner of CCAC, to help them with the COP presidency declaration that was delivered
the one on waste,
exactly, on methane-related emissions from waste, which is my passion area, by the way. So huge peak day for me for COP. But on the other hand, so I did that in the morning with my colleague Mariah. We helped there. We did a little ushering, helping people sit, shaking some hands, helping people find things, people that I know from the ecosystem, because I've been in this space for a number of years. But then I met a man who is going to become a client most likely, and he's in the mobility sector. And we went around and I said, hi, this is so-and-so, and went to a number of different countries and said, hi, this is so-and-so. You've been talking a lot about e-mobility. Is your minister around? Because this man has an innovation that's ready to deploy in your state, and they're already in X number of African nations around you, or they're already in the MENA region and they're doing X, Y, and Z, and they're interested in manufacturing, not just deploying their solution to sell a motorbike in this case. And it's, but then I also was sitting at an event for the Global Methane Hub, where I asked what for me was the most obvious question in the entire conversation around enteric methane, which is, why don't we have an all methane market? Why is it that why do we have to benchmark things to CO2 EQ? So being able to jump through those many hurdles to understand, okay, well, I might have a client, and at this point actually I have no clients that deal specifically in methane. And that's very notable, because a lot of them have died in the last year. They've died on the cutting room floor, not for lack of innovation, not for lack of willingness to work hard, but because the next steps for wherever they are in the TRL is just too much for the risk profile of the conventional VCs.
Right.
And when we're here at this COP, this is supposed to be the finance COP. And so what is exciting to me, and also a little concerning, is that we're not delivering on that quite yet. But I do think that there is a role for less in the business development space. That's not really, in my opinion, the purpose of coming to COP, although it is a really great convener of all the people you might want to speak to if you're trying to do business at the highest level in terms of impact. But I do think it's a place where you can, if you can think on the ecosystem level, where does the ecosystem have to be, and where are the holes and constraints that are causing companies to just fall off a cliff or limiting their ability to thrive? Well, then there's a conversation, because the regulators really don't know, especially from countries that aren't leading the innovation cycles. So, and that's a majority of nations. They're going to be adopters of innovation rather than exporters of those innovations.
You raised a teasing question there, and I don't know how easy it is to ask it, but you mentioned some people that have been looking at what to do with methane and you know, for years, and they didn't quite get there, and maybe they're not with us now. But then methane as an issue is now suddenly taking off, it seems, big time. So what innovations could there have been that we could see now with methane? I mean, can you do anything with methane? Well, apart from burning it for energy, what can you do? Or is it more what kind of markets you could create to actually basically see methane managed down faster because people have incentives? Yeah.
I mean, to answer your question, you have to take it sectorally. So there's three main sectors that emit methane. One is oil and gas. And in that sector, it's believed that the innovations are there, but the ROIs aren't. So it's better for
What are
these...
the ROIs?
Return on investment.
Okay.
Apologies.
The guest may not know all these acronyms.
My apologies. I think like the dork I am.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
apologize.
Just
So
imagine your grandma's out there listening to this.
she would love this conversation. She really would. So the return on investments aren't there. And what does that mean? It means that oil and gas exploration is more lucrative than clogging up some sort of a methane leak. And what's going to solve that, I believe, is the satellites that have been launching over the last year and going live that are, for lack of a better word, naming and shaming these emission sources and saying, hey, the orders of magnitude might be many X above what was even believed before. And so suddenly you might say, oh, well, this big oil company, they actually have the emissions equivalent to X number of nations. And so that's going to be possible through these satellite innovations. So that's one. The other is in the ag space, and it's very complicated. Why is it complicated? Because there are 1 billion farmers. And whenever you're dealing with that many humans and their livelihood strategies, any changes to those livelihood strategies at the very basic level even cause societal backlash and risk aversion and uncertainty. And that doesn't sit well with farmers who like to have predictable crops and outcomes and be able to have yields that feed their families. So there are some innovations in the area of enteric methane, which relates to the cultivation of bovines, of cows, and it can be in the area of changing their food, changing their some of their genetics, for instance, giving them vaccines over time. There are a couple different levers in that area. And then my dorky favorite is waste. In the waste sector, there is a hierarchy. So you want to respect the waste hierarchy, which is obviously don't create waste first and foremost. That's the easiest innovation, right? And everyone can do that by attempting to save money within their own kitchens by not wasting the 30% of food that currently goes into the trash. That organic waste actually decomposes in a landfill and emits methane. And so the question becomes, well, what happens if the food does end up as waste and in the trash? Well, then ideally it becomes compost. But compost is very, very hard to make economical. It just is, for various reasons. So then the question is, well, what else is there? So there could be, it could end up in the landfill, and then you can pipe out, for instance, the biogas, right? That's so that the landfills don't go on fire. It's a safety issue. It's also a health issue as well. But there are also, and this is one of my favorite areas that I believe is really underappreciated, and this is where UBQ does sit, is in the waste material sector. So for instance, I have a client called Biotic, and they take they can take organic waste. They can also take seaweed, for instance. That's a renewable resource. They can use that as a feedstock, and they have an organism that digests this organic material, and then basically it excretes out a plastic like material.
Right.
And that's bio-based, and they can then refine that and make it into a polymer that's used just as another polymer would be from fossil-based sources. So that's really a quite a novel thing.
I think that's such an interesting thing you just touched on there, because I also do some journalism for some publication in Germany called Climate Table, and did an article just the other day about 3 companies, one in Sweden, one in the US, and one in Finland, who are taking carbon dioxide, carbon, water, and green energy, green electricity, and making oils that mimic palm oil, coconut oil. The one in Finland's doing proteins from the same materials, and there's one in the States, I would think, which the Gates Fund or whatever have just invested in, that make fats, so butters and things like that. When you look back, actually, the Germans during the Second World War used to make margarine from the carbon coming off power stations, right? So it's not actually that unusual, but nobody's really thought about it before. So you mentioned that with the microbes turning the organic waste into a kind of plastic.
Right.
People making food. It's not going to replace all the food, of course, but it takes a bit of heat out of the deforestation that happens with, say, palm oil plantations in Asia, right?
It does a couple things, honestly. But what you're hitting on is the relevance of circularity in conversations like these, and also with just general pragmatism. Why would you waste what you can reuse? And why not take things that are currently being considered as not even, you don't even think about them, as in the tailpipe of some, I don't know what, and turning that into an input to production to make something else. This made sense to our great grandparents. This makes sense to biology. We see this in nature. There are natural examples, and that's why circularity, which we call more conventionally, is academically called industrial ecology. So we're looking at industry as if it's an ecological system. And in these spaces especially, I'm often very frustrated because I don't see enough discussion around circularity. Sometimes you see circularity talked about in the green zone, and this is the case now. ISWA has a pavilion. ISWA is the International Association for Solid Waste. They have the Waste and Resource Pavilion, and it's in the green zone. Last year it was in the blue zone, but it's still just one pavilion. And you think, wow, this is such an untapped potential for resources. And I'm a natural resource economist, and I specialize in climate change. But frankly, this just doesn't make any sense to waste this stuff. And I find it exciting because year over year, we see increases of interest in methane, but also less aggressive growth, but also in circularity. And I think as we find ourselves in a more resource-constrained world, where money is tighter for everyone's pocketbooks in every capacity, we're going to see increased conversations around circularity. And for me, that makes me very excited, because that's a world where we can be more proud of, because it mimics the world that we come from, which is nature.
Exactly. No, I mean, I'm a great fan of circularity myself, and I'm also a great fan of some of these assessments that show literally how we waste, like many buildings have far too much steel in them. Why is that? Maybe it's because the regulations said you have to have that much steel, but they don't need to have that much steel. Or it's because maybe the steel companies found it a good idea to sell more steel. But many buildings are erected with just huge quantities of natural resource in that they don't need to have to stand up. And that's a definition of madness. And then what happens afterwards, as you know, I mean, talking about waste, I mean, somebody was once telling me that if you added together all the metal now in chargers and mobile phones and stuff that people store in their attics all around the world because they think they might need that cable in 25 years, that it amounts to some significant percentage of the world's copper, and that there's more above ground now than there is below ground in terms of metals, right? I mean, this is how we are changing the world in the Anthropocene, but at the same time a great opportunity to do something better.
I think that these are great examples, and also it highlights that all of us in our own homes have opportunities to include circularity into our lifestyles. So we can donate our electronics that we're not using, including our cords and our chargers, maybe not within our countries, but to the developing world as an example, or they can be used for educational purposes, or to a new baby in the family to use as a monitor in lieu of buying a new device. I find it very, very logical. And also what I like the most is it makes sense for the pocketbook. So it's not, I come from America. So then this stuff becomes not a red or a blue issue. It just makes sense.
Yes.
And why not focus on the areas of climate where we don't have to worry about what political affiliation you have? I come from a place that's very at risk to climate change. It's called Norfolk, Virginia Beach. It's where the United States goes to war from on the eastern coast. And so we are at or below sea level, and this has been for generations like this that I've known about it. And so that's how I got into the space. But I'm trying to save my hometown. But frankly, I come from a family and from a world that's based in business and entrepreneurs. So for them to meld those two worlds together and say circularity and climate change go hand in hand, it makes a lot of sense. And my hometown is the definition of purple in terms of politics. So, but sea level rise is not a political issue in these cities because it's a reality. But circularity can be the same way.
Sure. So it sounds like you're doing really interesting work, and I think we've in this conversation we've covered so many different things. But I hope the guests get the sense that there is actually a lot of intellectual stimulation and creativity in doing the kind of work you do. And obviously we need more people like you. So I hope somebody out there has been inspired by that to start thinking about what you were actually saying. And when do you leave? When do you go back to the wonderful United States of America?
In 2 more days.
In 2 more days. And are you expecting to see lots of smiling faces, or?
My brother had a baby this week.
Oh, okay, that's
So
good
we
enough
are
reason.
overjoyed. Her name is Colby, and we
Uh-huh.
couldn't be happier. So I
Right.
can't wait to meet my niece. So
That's-
that's why I'm leaving a little bit early. And also it's American Thanksgiving. So
I'm sure babies are part of. I'm sure babies are part of the circular economy somewhere. We can work it out.
At least the circle of life, right?
By the way, I'm part of the circular economy because I actually repair my own socks now as a little contribution to, in the environment, whilst I'm watching soccer matches, and it's very therapeutic, especially if your team's losing.
That's a great idea.
Okay. Great, Rachel. Thank you very much indeed. And we will now wrap up this day by hearing from members of the Youth for Climate Action Initiative. Just stay with us, Rachel, who have been filming and talking to interesting people here at COP29 today. And after this, we will bring you all a very special and very important weather report linked with the United Nations Development Programme, this time brought to you by young Jack from England. So we'll see you again tomorrow.
Let's hear from our two delegation members, Leo and Max, as they share views on the conference, key topics, and their experience so far.
Okay, Leo, we've been at COP for a few days now. We've attended events, plenaries, press conferences. What have you learned? What is something you'd like to share?
Okay, so as I attended many press conferences, I heard many different opinions, different perspectives on the climate change especially. So for example, Azerbaijan, the host country of COP29, who became prosperous and wealthy due to fossil fuel. So they have a different opinion than, for example, a state like Norway. Then we have also WWF, a non-profit organization. They want, especially now at COP29, the final fossil fuel phase out, instead the transition away. Then we have also representatives from California, for example. He's a Republican and he thinks that you need more fusion energy because this is the only solution for a clean energy transition.
Okay, and is that a problem for the negotiations? Is that something we need to fix?
Yeah, especially because, for example, each party, each nation has a different opinion. So everyone wants something particular, and but all in all, we have to agree on a final text. And with different opinions, so many different opinions, it's very difficult.
And why is it so important that we end up agreeing on a final text and that everyone agrees?
Because especially the 1.5 limit is threatened. So this is the final COP where we need to find solutions to keep 1.5 in reach.
And would everyone be affected in the same way by the 1.5 limit being breached? Is everyone doing the same to stop it?
No, definitely not. We have, for example, the global south, who is extremely affected by the climate change, for example, with floodings, heat waves, and then we have the global north, much more prosperous, who have the financial methods to fight against the climate change. Usually they are affected by climate change, but not as much as the global south, because the global south has not the financial methods to fight against climate change to protect their civilization.
Okay.
And you?
Yeah. Since we're here representing the youth, I've been doing my best to attend as many youth-geared events as I can. And yesterday I went to the Youngo plenary session. So Youngo is the UNFCCC's youth constituency. So they are essentially representing young people at these conferences and in these negotiations. And at their plenary session, which was supposed to be their crowning moment, so where they shared their views with policymakers and decision makers, it was in this massive plenary hall with almost 1,000 seats, but there were only about 50 to 100 people there, and only about 5 adults, 5 decision makers. And for me, that shows that these kinds of programs like Youngo, they really aren't taken seriously, and our opinions and our views aren't properly taken into account in these negotiations and in these treaties. And that's a problem because at the end of the day, young people are the main stakeholders in this crisis. We're the ones who will suffer the most from climate change. So it makes no sense that we're not represented in the negotiations. So the only way to solve that The only way I see that we could really have an impact comes back to Joe Biden's famous line that all politics is personal. So no matter where you live, you must have a local representative, either to Parliament or even your mayor, or to the European Parliament, an ambassador, anything like that. You have opportunities to speak to these people. You have opportunities to go to events where they are and speak to them. And if you can do that, if you can build and cultivate a personal relationship with decision makers, with these people, you can push what's most important. We're not going to be taken seriously here as a coalition of youth in these negotiations. It's not going to happen. We can keep dreaming, but it's not going to happen. The only way we can really have an impact and we can really save our planet is by cultivating personal relationships with decision makers. And in the end, you might even make friends. Who knows? But we don't have a choice to save our planet. And to do that, it's very important that you go out, you meet these people, you speak to these people, you do your very best to convince these people to save our planet. Because in the end, we don't have a second planet. We don't have a second chance. And I know that I'd like to live in a world, and I'm sure you would too. Thank you so much for the chat, Leo.
Thank you.
Thank you to listen to Leo and Max. Stay with us for more updates, stories, and insights from our conference.
I'm Jack with a very report for the year 2050. From down here to up there, everything is crazy. Schools are closed because it's too hot. Wildfires are burning down whole towns and floods are making everything wet and... If we don't listen to scientists, things are going to be even crazier when I grow up. Long heat waves will affect 98% of children in the UK. All this heat could stop us from playing outside for ages. Extreme drought wheat crops, killing the one food my sister eats. Disasters cost taxpayers around the world almost £5 trillion. My parents hate taxes. All of this is caused by a blanket of heat trapping gases in the atmosphere that we should stop releasing more of. But don't worry, there's still a chance of clear skies. Right now, clean energy systems are moving in, creating tons of cool jobs. And solar prices have dropped lower than oil and gas, saving families money that we could spend on other things. A high-pressure system of adults could still move in and protect kids from a flood of really bad stuff. And there's heaps of things you can do today to help stop this. We'll keep you posted as we track whether adults stop wasting time and seriously try to tackle the problem. Because it's not just a weather report to us, it's our future.
Be cool, it isn't a joke to walk in the woods, without all the smoke. I love to swim, but not in a flood. We can't grow a crop, down in the mud. I want to be cool and get the job done, so we don't get left out to bake in the sun. Let's plant some trees and make some shade. From the ground up, that's how change is made. I wanna be cool, how about you? Together there's not one single thing that we couldn't do. Take care of the earth and each other too. Working together, we all can be cool. joining the movement to save what we've got. So every girl and every boy can live a good, long, healthy life and find some joy. I wanna be cool, how about you? Together there's not one single thing that we couldn't do. Take care of the earth and each other too. Working together, we all can be cool. Leaders, it's time to lead. Listen to your people in need. The whole world is sweating this out. Can't you hear your kids starting to shout? I wanna be cool, how about you? Together there's not one single thing that we couldn't do. Take care of the earth and each other too. Working together, we all can be cool. I wanna be cool, how about you? Together